I'm Jimmy Bach. This is History with Jimmy, along with my producer Chandler Holmes, and this is episode 30. And we have talked about many different things here, and different wars, World War I, World War II, and so today we're going to be talking about the Civil War. And we have so much stuff about the Civil War thanks to Joe Lipinski. And so I'm dedicating this particular episode to Joe because he gave us a lot of stuff about the Civil War, and we'll be showing you some of them today, not all of them. Also, he donated a bunch of great books that are at the library, and even if you're an adult and you want to know something about the Civil War, you can go down to Sherrill's library and you can get that book out. There's one about maps, there's one about different battles, there's different things. We also have in the newspaper room, where the coal room is, we have some pictures of some of the battle scenes and that sort of thing there as well. But because the Civil War was such a significant event in the history of the United States and the division that it took and the things that happened, today I'm going to read, to start off with, 12 facts about the Civil War. Because I could go on for hours and we don't have that much time to be able to do as we talk about this, but I want to bring this awareness, especially to the younger generation that maybe heard about the Civil War or a little bit about this. But like I said, Joe donated a lot of beautiful artifacts. He could have sold them and made money. He came here with his family, and he was so impressed with the museum. He said, I don't want people to make money, I want people to be able to see some of the things that were used in the Civil War. So first off, I'm going to talk about the Civil War. It was the bloodiest war in our country's history. It's often called First Modern War because of the efficiency and deadly weapons that became available for the first time. Just how terrible was this war that pitted brother against brother, and considering these 12 jaw-dropping facts. More soldiers died in the Civil War than any other American conflict, and 2/3 of them were killed by disease. About 625,000 men died in the Civil War. That's more Americans that died in both world wars, Korea and Vietnam combined. This amounted to 2% of the population at the time, which would be equivalent to about 6 million Americans dying today. Battles weren't as deadly as disease, however. Diarrhea, typhoid fever, lung inflammation, dysentery, childhood diseases like chickenpox were the cause of 67% of the deaths. And if those numbers aren't bad enough, new estimates suggest that the death toll may even been higher because there probably wasn't the reporting back then as there would be today. Gettysburg wasn't the only unusual bloody battle. More Americans were killed in 2 days at the Battle of Shiloh than in all the previous American wars combined. The Battle of Antietam was the only day-long, but left 12,401 Union soldiers killed, missing, or wounded, which is higher than the typical estimates of Allied casualties on D-Day, with 23,000 casualties overall. It was the bloodiest single day of the Civil War at Cold Harbor, Virginia. 7,000 men fell in 20 minutes. Nearly 56,000 soldiers died in prison camps from starvation and disease. A quarter of those deaths happened at one camp. No American prisoner of war camp had ever held more than 100 men at the time prior to 1861. During the Civil War, each camp held thousands. Although they weren't intentionally killing prisoners, ignorance of proper sanitation, overcrowding, lack of resources led to an outrageous number of soldiers' deaths. Camp Sumter in Georgia was the largest of the 150 military prisons and also the deadliest. Nearly 40,000 soldiers were in prison. 40,000 soldiers. And 13,000, or 1/3 of them, died. An estimate 40% of Civil War dead were never identified. With advances in weaponry and the sheer number of men killed, many bodies were damaged beyond recognition or left to rot in piles of the battlefield. Amputation was the treatment of choice for broken or severely wounded limbs. There were so many wounded men that doctors found it impossible to do time-consuming procedures like removing part of a broken bone or some damaged flesh. More than half of leg amputations at the thigh or knee ended up being fatal. That number shot up to 83% if the amputation was done at the hip joint. I have a relation, George Ewells, who is buried up at the Pine Hill Cemetery, and my grandmother told me that he lost his leg in the Civil War. Surgery wasn't sterile. Doctors of the day did not understand sterilization and believed infection was caused by contaminated air. So cleaning surgical tools often meant wiping them on a dirty apron. There weren't antibiotics either. So if a doctor didn't cut off a soldier's limb, there was a good chance he'd lose it to infection or gangrene anyway. There was no anesthesia on the battlefield. It wasn't available. Patients were given chloroform either, or failing that, a glass of whiskey and a bullet to bite it down. Did you ever hear the phrase, bite the bullet? Well, guess what? This was one of the items that he donated. This is history that we're holding in our hand today. This was used by a soldier. He told me that he had gotten it, and it's right on there. Bite the bullet from Gettysburg, known as the hospital bullet. This is what these soldiers went through with pain and suffering when they were being amputated by a leg or an arm or something. They had to bite down on one of these bullets. These were lead bullets because the lead was soft and they could use that to bite down on. We have one here at the FLT Museum, thanks to Joe Lipinski. Afro-Americans made up less than 1% of the North's population, but 1% of the Union Army. Black men were not allowed to join the Army until 1863, and about 180,000 black men, more than 85% of eligible African Americans in the northern states, fought. While white soldiers earned $13 a month, black soldiers only earned $10. They were charged a $3 clothing fee that lowered their monthly payment to $7. The highest paid black soldier made less than the lowest paid white ones, and after protesting by refusing to accept their wages and gaining support from the abolitionist congressman, black soldiers finally received equal pay in 1864, paid retroactively to their enrollment date. 20% of the soldiers were under 18. The Confederacy had no minimum enlistment age. Even though the Union Army technically required soldiers to be 18, many officers looked the other way when it came to underage soldiers. They needed everybody they could get. Some younger soldiers signed up as drummers or buglers. Musicians weren't supposed to fight, but when the battles began, they dropped their instruments and grabbed a weapon. Believe it or not, women secretly fought in the war. Both sides prohibited women from enlisting. However, that didn't stop them from joining in disguise. Since they were incognito, the exact numbers were not known. Some estimates say 400 women served in the war by pretending to be men. Many certainly didn't make it out as a sense of loyalty to their cause, but historians say some women were just in it to make ends meet in desperate times. The estimated cost of the war, $6.19 billion, $146 billion in today's dollars. While the human cost in lives was most tragic, the Civil War also had a high financial toll. And before the war, the United States government spent roughly $1 million a week. And by the end of the war, the federal government was spending $3.5 million a day. The South was primarily battlefield of the war and suffered greatly with $10 billion in property damage and 2/5 of its livestock destroyed. Number 12, as of 2014, the Department of Veterans Affairs is still paying a Civil War pension. We have a plaque over here that was donated to us by Jolene Yabel Gearhart for a gentleman who was discharged by the Civil War, and 30 years later, his wife got an $8 a month pension. Lastly, the most important person in the war was Abraham Lincoln, one of the best presidents that we've ever had. And he wrote a speech, and I'm going to read it. "For 67 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing that nation or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come here to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is also together fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or distract. The world will little know, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to increase devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that we were here highly resolved that the dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth." Here's another one of the items donated by Joe Lipinski, and this is an 1858 model canteen found on the Antietam battlefield here. And we actually have a book telling about different canteens that were used. This was donated to us by Jay Smith. This was, these are rare because they slid on to the bayonet that was fastened onto the gun, but these were lost because they would come off. And this, you can see here, it says U.S. This was from the Civil War. We're also given a pair of glasses that were used in the Civil War. They're very delicate, so we're going to leave them in this case. We also have a musket tool dug from the Civil War battlefield, a pocket knife also dug there. These are already been in frames so that you'll be able to look at them, but obviously you can't touch them. One of the other things we're given, this was used, he told me that how they put powder into the guns. And then there was one, the major things that we have that I did not know, and I'm going to, here's the end of one of these bullets, and like I said, they were made out of lead that they used to bite down on. This was used to put in the end of the gun when they had powder in the barrel and they weren't going to be shooting it right away, and they were concerned about the powder getting damp if it was raining or it was cold or snowing, and so they would put this in the end of the gun barrel to keep the powder dry. So at the very end, I would hope that more people would come and take the books and learn more about the Civil War, because it divided our country. And you could still say maybe some of that's still happening today. So this is Jimmy Bach, along with my producer, Chandler Holmes, signing off. This is episode 30. Please click the like and subscribe, and also come to the FLT Museum where we can share some history with you, and bring your children. And if you have stories from your parents or the grandparents to tell about sacrifices that they're made, we're always willing to listen and hear that and maybe do an episode on it. Thanks again for watching.